Welcome to FireSide Talks Live. Tonight we're talking about why yelling at our kids isn't really effective and what we can do instead. Welcome to FireSide Talks Live. If this is your first time with us, welcome, welcome, welcome. This is the place where you come, we take our capes off, we get really quiet and still in a lovely, non judgmental, and supportive community. And each week we have amazing coaches that drop in to help share their awareness and their insight about what we can all do to make sure we're raising empowered kids. Tonight we're talking all about yelling, why yelling isn't very effective, and what you can do instead. If this is your first time with us, I want you to do two things. Make sure you take part in the conversation. We're open to answering all of your questions as we go along tonight. Could be questions specific to yelling, or maybe just support you need for current challenges within your parenting at the minute. And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have a whole host of resources that we put up each and every week to support you along your entire parenting journey. And you can find us on YouTube at empoweredkidstv.com. Tonight, we have the amazing Val Mullally. Val is going to join us and talk us all the way through why yelling isn't effective and what we can do instead. Val, welcome to Fireside Talks.
Lovely to be with you again, Nicole.
Let's talk a little bit, share with our audience a little bit about your background and what you currently do in terms of supporting families.
So my first career was in teaching. I am a mother and now a grandmother, so kids have always been part of my life. And in the early 2000s, when we moved to Ireland, I said to my husband, I'm not going back to teaching. I need to focus on working with parents and supporting parents, because I could just see there were just so many challenges that parents are facing. And I'd realized along the line with my first career and with the background reading and research I was doing, that we could do it differently and we could do it better. And as I'd actually started bringing this into my own family with my own children, I saw how things changed and how it made a big difference. And I just wanted to share that with everyone. So I started in the early 2000s. I did my master's degree. I did various parenting courses to add on what I already knew, and started building that. And particularly, I trained as a coach as well. So I'm an accredited coach, and I do parent coaching, both one-to-one, and I'm open to group coaching as well. And I have gone on to be an author as well. So I've got several books, and the one that obviously relates to tonight is Stop Yelling, 9 Steps to Calmer, Happier Parenting, which is an ebook only, a short book, an easy read that can make all the difference. And as you can probably see on the table behind me that side, 2 of my other books are Behave, What to Do When Your Child Won't, which is paperback and ebook. And also, if you have a younger child and you have a baby on the way, Baby and Toddler on Board. So those are some of the resources. And yeah, my organization is called Coemba. Coemba.com is the website, or maybe we can put that up, Koemba.com. And Coemba is based on a Cameroonian word meaning the smile on a child's face as she dreams peacefully in her sleep. And that's my dream, to support parents, to support all of you to be able to make that difference of creating calmer, happier homes where children would even smile in their sleep.
That sounds amazing, Val. And I'm excited to kind of dive into tonight's conversation.
Lovely to be with you. Thank you, Nicole.
Let's start with where I think a lot of parents that are struggling to let go of yelling, where they're at. Why does it feel like our kids really only listen to us when we yell?
Well, I was thinking about that, and I thought it's rather like if you hang up a big white sheet on the washing line, and a little bug or a little bird or something happens along, and you get a little dark spot on the sheet, and all you can see is that dark spot. You're not seeing all the rest of the sheet that's absolutely fine. You're just focused on that dark spot. And I think sometimes that happens. We can really get about what's going on instead of stepping back and seeing all the wonderful and good things that are happening in our family. And I think at the moment it's so challenging for parents. We
Absolutely.
have a lot of stress in the homes right now. And yet, there's some really good stuff. There's been some research being done in Denmark, for instance, where the teenagers are saying, I've never had this quality of relationship with
Mm.
my child, with my parents before. I've never had where we sit and we listen and we share. And so, while it can feel so stressful, maybe it's stepping back and see all the things that are working, that are things we can build on and create the home we want.
I love that research out of Denmark. I remember when we first went into lockdown in March last year, I made a promise to myself that at the end of this, and obviously I didn't know back then how long it was going to be, but I said at the end of this, I want my kids to say this was the best time. Like we had the most fun. And I don't get it every day. There are some days where I'm so stressed out and I'm tired. I'm like, right, let's just go to bed early, all of us. But then most days, because I have that in my mind, that I want this to be a fun experience, a time where we enjoy having more time with each other. It kind of fuels what I do throughout the day. All the little points that I put play in, as opposed to letting stress take over.
Yeah.
So let's go back to yelling. I really would like to share with parents because we have parents in two camps. We have those that know, you know what, I want to communicate differently.
Mhm.
I want to really stop yelling. And then we have those that are still adamant that, well, they only listen to me when I yell. So if they would have listened to me before, I would not have had to yell, but I'm yelling because they're not listening to me. So I want us to touch a little bit on what's the real impact to the child and to the parent child relationship when we yell to get our way.
Yeah, and that's interesting, exactly what you said, when we yell to get our way. And we often, when we're yelling, we've totally forgotten there's another little person here, and they've got their own agenda and their own ideas. And that's not necessarily wrong or bad. They just, we want to get the homework done now, or do this, or do whatever. They're busy maybe with their toys or whatever, and totally involved in that. And what makes our agenda more important than theirs? So I think, firstly, it's interesting, the expression, the more you insist, the more I resist. And
Mm.
so when we start yelling, we actually start getting into this ongoing tango of you yell, I don't listen, and it goes, it just gets worse and worse. So when we can rather think, is this really working? And I don't think it ever does. And particularly, it doesn't work on the long term. If you think about it, when we yell, we're breaking the disconnection. You can't have that sense of being really connected with your child when you're in yelling mode. And I think we don't stop and think, well, what does this do to my child's self-esteem? You imagine if you've ever been in the situation, in a work situation, for instance, where you've had a boss that yells at you, which actually people can get into trouble for legally these days, but it totally undermines one's self-esteem. One feels totally unhappy. What makes it okay to yell at our children? There has to be, and there is, a better, easier way. And I think the other thing we don't stop to think about is, isn't yelling a type of bullying?
Mm.
Because actually, it's saying when I'm bigger than you and my voice is more powerful or my stature is more powerful, I can impose on you what I want. And if that happened in anywhere else like the school, we'd be saying, my child's been bullied. And I think we need to step back. I'm not wanting us to be harsh on ourselves as parents, but think, actually, am I teaching my child either this is how you behave when you don't get your own way and teaching them to have bullying behavior, or the other is they go into their shell and they close right down because that's the way they stay safe. But either way, yelling is not helping our children to thrive and to be like a flower opening up and blossoming.
I think that's a light bulb, the drop the mic kind of moment, Val, to really consider when you get to that space of yelling, are you actually entering the space of bullying? Because really, the yelling comes with more than just increased volume. It comes with an angry face, a stature of, I am bigger, I am in control, and you will do as I say. And really, I wouldn't want, if I thought of my child outside of the home environment and somebody was treating them like that, it would get my mama bear instincts up. I would be like, how dare you talk to my child like that, right? But in the same vein, we excuse ourselves. I was stressed. I was tired.
And you're saying something important there about, if it was something else, my mama bear would come out. But the thing is, when you turn into the monster, where does your child go for
Exactly.
protection then? Normally,
Exactly.
your child runs to you for protection, knows they're safe with you. But what happens when you turn into the roarer?
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Oh, I love it. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about how do we get to that space of cooperation so that we don't have to resort to yelling. What are we missing in the dynamic of the relationship where we get to that space where we feel like yelling is our last resort, but it is a resort because I haven't been able to find my influence in any other way.
So, first of all, if we think about it, we're not actually getting cooperation when we're yelling, we're getting compliance.
Mm.
That's very different.
Mm.
When we're thinking around our parenting and how do we interact with them, we need to realize the younger child's brain is still very much under construction. So actually, what will work with an older child isn't going to work with a 2-year-old. And at that toddler stage, they've got their know now. And that's an important part of their development. It's part of them developing, this is who I am. And, we tend to say terrible twos. I think it's terrific twos.
So do I.
Yeah, what we need to realize is the brain is still under construction. At that age, we need to rather be able to divert their attention elsewhere. Sometimes meltdowns will happen with little ones, and we need to calm them down, reassure them, help them regain their equilibrium. So, always bearing in mind, with younger children, we need to do differently than with older children. With older ones, I think we need to really think about, so what does cooperation look like? And think, well, what does it look like even with adults? And that means it's about discussion, about deciding who's responsible for what, around being able to agree on things and get everybody on board. And also, I think family meetings can be really helpful with that, where you get together as a family and discuss, what's needed, how we're going to do this, and even discuss, well, okay, what are the consequences if we don't get, and we've agreed, say, to tidy the kitchen and who's doing what, we're going to do. What's the outcome if we don't get it done? So what time do we need it done by, and what's the outcome? And then let them own their particular responsibility. I think we also need to bear in mind that how we address a situation matters, because very often we're sort of like chasing out the door from the other side of the room and, oh, do such and such, and it doesn't land. If you're laughing like, all been there and done that. Yeah. And so, if you're wanting to ask them to do something, say their name at the beginning of the sentence, Nicole, and then say, because we say blah blah blah, Nicole at the end. Oh, but they weren't listening. Nicole's name's only at the end. So putting the name at the beginning of the sentence really can help. And think about coming close enough that you're really making eye contact and they're really seeing you. And a really important thing I just want to stress, and I'm deliberately looking right at the camera now, is what I call soft gaze. Very often we can look like this at our kids. And it's very interesting when we do that, we actually focus in, not only do we give that message to them, but in ourselves, we get focused in what's going on. And when you consciously choose to rather let your face soften and soften around your eyes and soft gaze, actually you start seeing a bigger picture and you see more and you give a totally different message to your child. Soften your gaze and you'll soften everything else about how you are.
There's so much juice in that, Val. First, I want to say that I think the overriding thing I'm pulling out is that a lot of times we forget the parent-child dynamic is a relationship. And the same keys that work in every other relationship will work in that parent-child dynamic. Nobody wants to have a spouse that's yelling, that's shouting, that's always scrawling. And if you think about having a spouse where that's the interaction you have, that's not a healthy relationship. Nobody wants to be in a relationship like that. And it's also true for kids because the desire to be in that space is not age dependent. It's connection dependent. And so our kids don't want to be around us when every time they look at us, we have that kind of scroll on, or
Mhm.
we treat them like they're less than. And I think it's important for us to take a step back and think about that from a relationship perspective. I laughed when you talked about yelling across the house because
Mhm.
that was definitely something I did. I would stay in one room and shout out, and then I would say, "You're not listening." And my kids have been raised to be very outspoken but respectful. And my kids one day said, "We are listening, we're just not obeying." And so there's a difference, mommy, and we kind of need to talk about that. And I love the fact that you're saying sit down and have a suggestion and a discussion about it, because that's where we were able to make ground. When we sat down and discussed, my son said, "You know what? Yelling at me across the house doesn't work. First of all, I'm engrossed in what I'm doing, so it's hard for me to pay attention." And he said, "How about you just walk up and just touch me on the shoulder? If you touch me on the shoulder and you say my name, it will get my attention and then I'll be able to hear you." And the fact that I think I was willing to ask and I was open enough to listen, they felt respected enough to give suggestions and for us to try. And it therefore meant when I acted in accordance with the suggestions, they were more willing to listen in and to say, "Okay, how do I need to respond?" And it didn't mean that they always like, "Okay, mommy said jump, how high?" But it
Mhm.
might have been, "Can you give me 5 minutes, mom?"
Mhm.
Or, "Can I
Sure,
wrap
sure.
this up?"
That's what happens in other relationships, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's a give and a take. Mhm.
Exactly.
Mm.
So I love, for me, I think that is, if all viewers take away just that as the central point of this discussion, that the relationship with between you and your children is still a relationship, and you can look at the dynamics you would want to have in any other relationship and fill that into your parent-child relationship, and you'll find more respect and more compassion and more love. Let's talk about how we take better ownership of our own emotions. So, rather than saying, "You made me," if you had listened the first time, I would not have been yelling. How do we take
Mhm.
ownership for what we feel and how we act?
So I think the first thing I'd say is we need to realize the difference between reacting and responding. You know, when you go to the doctor and they check your knee jerk and they sort of hit there and your leg sort of kicks out, to me that is react, where it just happens. Whereas respond is actually when I choose, this is how I choose to be. And so we need to stop and think, how do I choose to be? I think it's really helpful for parents to identify at least three values and with older children, even discuss it at home. And even consider making like a family badge, that has your values on it. What are the words like mutual respect and caring and words like that? What are the three? If you could choose only, in fact, a good way to do it is choose 10 words first of all, and then see, well, can we get it down to five? And then what are
Mhm.
the three most important? And do it with older kids, do it as a family activity, even that you choose what are the values in your home. Because if we hold in mind the values, we can think, hang on, is this in line with my values? So, as you say, mutual respect you mentioned. No, if I'm yelling at them, I'm not in a place of mutual respect. But it doesn't mean we won't feel like reacting sometimes. But the thing is, every time we react, every time we jump in with the yelling, neuroscience tell us neurons that fire together wire together. So the more you yell, the more you're going to make that's like the groove in your brain that your brain goes down to. And actually, you start doing it, they're going to follow as well. So I really invite parents to think around what really matters here. If you ask yourself, even at a time when it hasn't gone well, to stop afterwards and think what really matters here. And in my book, because I think this was something that I really recognized was so challenging for parents, it's so easy for yelling, that's why I wrote the Stop Yelling book. It's a quick little book, it's an easy read. It gives you 9 steps. You can just do one a week or one every few days if you want to. But if you take those 9 steps and you seriously implement them, it will move you from yelling to literally, you can be a parent who doesn't yell unless there's an emergency, like don't run in front of the car type of thing. Really can shift you that much. And just to say that the first one is A, is acknowledge. The first thing we have to do, the very first step I've got, is acknowledge where you're at. And even say it to the kids, if you've lost it, to say, whoops, I'm sorry there, that's not how I want to be, I'm sorry I yelled. But if you put it on them, oh, well, you made me yell, you're not owning your stuff and your responsibility, and that you're meant to be the adult in the relationship. And so that's the very first step, is acknowledging where you're at. And that doesn't mean beating yourself up. It's really about just saying, I can do differently. And it really matters if I want my children to grow up, to really flourish. I'm going to choose right now, today, to stop yelling.
I love the whole point of acknowledging, because I think very much so sometimes as parents, we want our kids to do differently to what we would do. And in some instances, we want them to do better than we are willing to do ourselves. So it's easy to say that I'm yelling at you because you didn't listen. But if our kid said, I hit him because he took my toy,
Mm-hmm.
that's not acceptable for us. So in one instance, we're saying, I can give up ownership of my emotions
Mm-hmm.
and simply react, but I want you to do better. And, and
What
that
a
doesn't
way
make
to
sense, right?
mm-hmm.
Be-
Mm-hmm.
Because our kids just learn by what we do.
Yeah.
And so for me, when I made the decision that I wanted to communicate differently, it was two things. I wanted to be able to every day kind of push the boundaries on what the best of me look like. I
Wow.
want to make sure that I can be better. Like today, when I go, I put my head on that pillow. I want to know today I was better. I did better than yesterday. There was a little piece of me where I grew. And I wanted my kids to feel the type of respect that I want the rest of the world to show to them. And if I can show them what that look like, how would they know when they're in the space where they're respected and when they're not? And so it was important for me to do it. And I know that I needed their help, because I had it like an automatic thing. I had those neural pathways well grooved
Mm-hmm.
where,
Mm-hmm.
where yelling was just easy. And so I had to get them on board. And I said, this is what I want. And my kids to today still hold me accountable. If I get snappy,
Mm-hmm.
and not in a way where they judge me, Val, but in a way where we now show each other compassion. So if I get snappy because I'm stressed or I'm tired, my kids will say, my older boy usually says, do you need a hug, mom?
Oh, that's lovely.
And then my youngest son will say, I think you need to take a break, mommy. I think you need a little bit of a rest. But they won't say, why are you behaving like that? You're
And
yelling.
so what's really interesting with that is they're learning compassion there. And so it's not as a place of being judgmental. It's not they're not owning your anger. They're knowing your anger is about you.
Yeah.
And so they've learned a really powerful lesson for life. Think how important that is in any situation. Know that the other person's anger is about them. Their behavior is about them. My response is about me.
And it was not an overnight switch.
Mm-hmm.
It took us a moment, right? It took us some time to get here. But for me, when I see those things as the byproduct, one, that we have greater compassion for each other as a family, that we can help each other grow as a team, like we're all cheering each other on. Like I know there's a standard that you can reach to. Let me remind you where you wanted to go, as opposed to judging you and pushing you down. For me, that is such like a beautiful gift that I could give them, that they can take. It was worth the work of figuring out how to communicate without yelling.
Yeah. And I want to say, when you're saying that, Nicola, sometimes parents listening in can be feeling guilty around, oh, hang, have I messed up my kids? And, the great thing we also know with neuroscience is it's never too late for our brains to burn new pathways and learn to do differently, both us as adults and also for our children. So there's always time to build that connection. And think what a lovely thing it is that we're teaching our children, that maybe we haven't always done our parenting in the way that's been most helpful. But now our children see we're willing to grow and to change. Think what an important lesson that is for life, that your children see, hey, no matter what age we are, we can keep growing, we can keep learning.
Yeah. And I've said to parents all the time, the guilt bag, there's really on apart from the first glance to see what is this here to teach me, there is no need to carry around the guilt bag. Just put it down. And I remind myself when I feel like, ooh, I can see that place I messed up. I remind myself lilies grow in the mud. And I just go, okay, that was our mud. Let's figure out how we grow our lilies.
How to be the
Because
lady now.
because you can walk with that guilt and it could sap your energy, so you have less to focus on how do you actually move forward. So there's no point in carrying the guilt.
So when you're carrying the guilt and you're holding on to that, it makes you far more likely to be reactive, which means you're far more likely to fall back into old patterns. So the more
Absolutely.
compassionate you can be to yourself and to your children, the easier it will be to be the parent you want to be.
Yeah. And you know what I've learned along the way as well, Val, that I can't give what I don't have. So the level of compassion I have for myself is the
Mhm.
level of compassion I'll be able to give to anybody else.
Yeah.
And if I beat myself up, then I cannot like logically think that there's somehow some magic will happen where I will be able to stand in a space and have understanding and compassion for my children or for any other human being. Because if I have judgment for myself, that's what I would expect for all of the relationships. And it was a work, and it still is a work in progress to let go of the guilt. But I have little mantras like mud creates the lilies, and different things that I say for myself to remind myself that there is no value in holding on to the guilt.
Yeah. And part of what I say with that as well is how would you speak to your best friend? You know, if your best friend was saying to you, oh, I've just yelled at the kids, I'm feeling so bad. You know, you wouldn't turn around and say, yes, stupid, you did it again. You wouldn't do that to your best friend. You'd say, oh, come on, you know, be kind to yourself. And
Yeah,
so we talk to ourselves as we'd want to talk to our best friend.
absolutely. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about if all the parents that are listening in to us today, if they decided, okay, you know what, they've made some good points, I'm on board, I'm going to figure out how to let go of this yelling. What would be the first thing you would say they should start by doing?
I think the first one ties in exactly what you're saying with compassion. And I've got it written on block letters here is the word kind. Be
Mm.
kind to yourself as well as be kind to your children. I think firm, consistent boundaries. I think very often what happens is we want to be nice parents. And sometimes we let things go and we let things go. And then we end up like pressure builds up like a pressure. Yeah, we go pow. And so I think when we can recognize our children need firm and consistent boundaries shared in a kind way. So I believe there's a big difference between discipline and punishment. I believe discipline is nurturing them and bringing them with love, whereas punishment is about fear. So I don't believe in punishing children, but I do believe children need firm, consistent boundaries. And actually, that's why I wrote my other book there, the Behave What to Do When Your Child Won't. It's almost like the pincher movement of this is the stop yelling. This is about how do I need to do differently. And this one is about how do I support my child to do differently? Because children don't automatically know what the boundaries are. They need to learn the boundaries. And so those two books go actually hand in hand, both the how do I discipline so that I'm not getting so uptight inside, and also, how do I make sure that I am staying calm and being a parent who isn't getting her kids uptight because of my behavior? And a phrase I particularly like is the one, mind the gap. You know, when the train comes into the railway station, we
Mind
used
the
to
gap.
do it, but we haven't done for a while, probably. But that, you get that mind the gap, and just pausing for that moment before when you think you might jump in and yell, and think what really matters here, and just see your child as a person who's doing the best they can right now as well. And if we mind the gap, because that part of the brain where we yell from comes from the reptilian part of the brain, which gets triggered when there's an emergency. Now, there is a time when there's an emergency, as I say, like if there was a danger where you might need to yell immediately. But when we yell in with our anger there, we're jumping in instead of using the frontal part of our brain, which takes a moment longer to come on board to think what really matters here. So unless it is a genuine emergency, just pause for a second and think what really matters here. How do I choose to be? Even think about having those values we talked about. Have it up somewhere on the wall to remind yourself, and just take that step back before you interact. If necessary, if you're feeling really wound up, maybe just sometimes physically moving a bit, instead, if you're at the table, just maybe get up and take the dishes to the sink for a moment, whatever. Breathe before you come back to address it, so that you give your thinking brain time to catch up about and think what really matters here.
I love that. I'm going to add mind the gap because I can hear the voice in the train station saying it. So I'm going to add mind the gap to my mantras. I also remind myself this is not an emergency. This is not an emergency. And that gives me the space to know I don't have to say something right away.
Mm-hmm.
If I came back 5 minutes later, we could still discuss it and work it out and find a solution. It doesn't have to be right away. So that gap is really important for us to figure out how to create that space so we're responding rather than reacting.
Yeah. And then
Love
at times we won't always, particularly when we start off, we're still going to default and fall back into an old pattern when we're under stress. And what matters is we stop and look at it and think, okay, what could we have done differently? What was happening just before I ended up yelling? And instead of blaming the kids, so often it's when we haven't given ourselves enough time, for instance, and we're under stress. And if we stop back and look and think, what could I have done differently? We can often see that, well, me just doing something a bit differently would have caused a different outcome.
Yeah.
Or on the other hand, if the children are overstressed, and I think our children are carrying a lot of stress at the moment, we need to help them to find healthier, happier ways to let out their stress. Maybe they need to get out to walk. Maybe they need Play-Doh is a great thing with younger children to let off stress and so on. But we need to think what's going on for them. If they're already high up on the stress level, the last thing they need is us yelling as well. We need us to help them regain their equilibrium.
I'm going to share one question that's coming in from the village. And this one comes from Norma. And Norma writes, what do you do when you and your parenting partner is not on the same page? So whether that's your spouse or your partner, whoever you're co-parenting with, you're not on the same page and the other partner is not a calm parent. What do you do in that instance?
So recognize that if the other person is very stressed out and upset at the moment, to try and come in and deal with it then is likely just to boil things over more. The time to deal with it is when you're both calm and talk things through. And I want to say, when one parent is modeling doing it differently and they're setting the example, that alone has a knock-on effect. And so many times that will change things. I think there is a time, I don't believe children should ever be left in an abusive situation. So, there is a time when you need to say, okay, I need to do something differently. If I've tried to set a boundary here, but this person just is continually treating children in a way that's really, really not okay, I need to seek professional help. I do want to say that. But I think so often we can make a shift in the family dynamics by how we are. And I've seen it time and time again with working with parents. And as they do differently, I can remember one dad particularly was like, what was wrong with the way we were brought up, and was totally against his wife coming and doing work with me. And I had to torture the principles in my behave book around how to deal with discipline issues. And a few weeks later, she contacted me and said, I can't believe it. I walked through, my husband, who wouldn't have anything to do with this, he walked in, and I walked into the room, and there he was using exactly the same way of dealing with the children that I'd learnt with you. And he'd learned it just by observing her. The other thing I say, avoid words like you're doing the wrong thing. Because the moment anyone feels they're being wrong and they're put down, they're just going to put up the barriers. They're going to go into defensive. And likewise with the word should. Oh, you should do that with the kids. Is just going to bring a defensive reaction. Far more helpful to say something like, one thing I find helpful is, and sharing like that, than saying you should blah, blah, blah. So think, how am I interacting in a way that is modeling that whole thing of mutual respect?
I love it. And it comes back to the fact that we're talking about the dynamics of healthy relationship. So, whether the relationship is with your child or with your spouse, you can only find growth and learning and movement forward if everybody feels safe. If one person feels like they're being threatened or you're coming down on them or you're criticizing them, that puts them into fight and freeze. And so now they're in that space where they can't hear you. There's no opportunity to grow or to learn. One of the things that I also find helpful, Val, is that sometimes I ask parents to take a step back from the dynamics of parenting. So not just the how do we discipline, how do we set boundaries. Take a back step from that and really see if you can be on the same page for the type of adult you want to raise,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe what you want your kids to say about their childhood. Because a lot of times parents find it easy to get on the same page there.
Yeah.
And where they differ is in the dynamics. But if you can remind yourself of where you're heading, and then you
Mm-hmm.
can say, okay, what are the right tools to help us with
Yeah.
this one? If we want our children to look back and say, my childhood was wonderful and my parents were loving and
Mm-hmm.
understanding, well, what do we need on a daily basis to get there?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's the important need. So, what's helpful to achieve that? Because when you use the word helpful, because if you're using right, wrong, so who decides who's right and who's wrong?
Exactly, exactly. You're right, Val.
Whereas
Yeah,
if you're using the word helpful, was that helpful what we did?
yes,
You can
yeah,
see by the interaction with what unfolds as to actually
yes.
was it helpful, and is tying in with what you're saying about long term. Is this also helpful to achieve our long term goal? So, like giving in to the children and giving them whatever they want, is this supporting our goal to raise children who are caring about other people and can hold their own boundaries? No, it's not. So then we need to, again, the word helpful is a word that works there.
I love it. All
Mm.
right, Val, I'm going to wrap up because I think this was a really amazing conversation. A lot of great insight for parents to take away. Um, for me, again, I think what was instrumental in all the things you said was remember that this is a relationship. And
Mm.
nobody wants to be in a relationship where they feel like they're being bullied and somebody's using their size or the fact that they have all the power in the relationship to make them feel small and less than. And I think that was beautiful message to give to our parents today. So thank you very much.
And so to invite parents to think what they do want and focus what they do want, because when we focus on the positive, then we've got something to move towards.
Beautiful.
Lovely,
Thank you so
Nicole.
much for
Yeah,
joining us, Val.
great. Okay, then. See you soon. And to all your
Thank you for joining us for this episode. We're all about sharing and supporting this village. So if you found value in this episode, be sure to share it with your family and friends. And remember, this is a weekly show. So if you haven't already, subscribe and hit that bell icon so that you'll be notified of our next episode. As we always say in the village, you're just one connection away. With love and gratitude, empower us. Until next time.